everyone. We start our session today. I will invite, first of all, Mr. Bagai to give his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madhu. Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of UNEP and our partner WRI, I would like to invite the distinguished panelists here and all the other participants who are attending this webinar. It gives a very strange feeling to be having to talk and converse and have a dialogue through a system like this, online system, but that really has become a way of life over the last 3 months. And we all are getting used to it, but it's also highlights a very important fact that UNEP this year is wanting to also highlight as part of its World Environment Day celebrations, which started on 5th June. This webinar is part of that series of webinars which we are organizing on biodiversity and ecosystems, which is the theme of the World Environment Day. UNEP, in fact, brought out a report in 2016 talking about the biodiversity loss and the ecosystem loss leading to a number of zoonotic diseases. And I think the present pandemic has strengthened that line of thinking that UNEP has been wanting to focus on. And it gives us an opportunity to look at how we have treated nature over the last few decades. Just as an example, if you're just taking India, the last stimulus package that was introduced by the Prime Minister, which is 10% of the GDP, that is the kind of cost that is being spent on addressing the implications and impact of the pandemic. And if you look at how we could have strengthened our ecosystems and biodiversity in the last 50 years, probably those costs would have been saved, and part of that cost could have gone to biodiversity conservation. So I think this pandemic gives us a lot of lessons in terms of how we build our new systems in the coming years. And I see as one of the panelists, Ajay Narayan Jha of the Finance Commission, and the Finance Commission, I'm sure, has a huge responsibility at this stage to really look at what kind of resource allocations should be done in a way in the coming years to see that our new normal recognizes the fact that biodiversity loss and ecosystem losses were primarily responsible for what we are going through. I'm very happy to welcome all the distinguished panelists who are here. We have Pushpam Kumar, Chief Environmental Economist and Senior Economic Advisor of UNEP. We have Helen, Vice President of Climate and Economics at WRI. We have Jua, the Chief Economist of IUCN. We have Vinod Bihari, Chairman of NBA. Ajay, of course, is there. And we have Madhu, the Chief Economist for WRI, who would be not only moderating this session, but also adding a lot of WRI perspectives into this. And I would like to hand over to Madhu now to take over from here. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Thank you, Atulji. Thank you very much for setting the stage for the discussion today. Good evening, everyone. And I wish to convey in the very beginning that this event is being recorded. A very hearty welcome to the panel discussion on financing nature conservation as a response to COVID-19, jointly hosted by United Nations Environment Programme, World Resources Institute, and National Biodiversity Authority. Well, as Atulji has rightly mentioned, and we all know that the current pandemic came from disturbance of nature, and the cure of the problem also lies in nature rebuilding and investing in natural capital. But investing does not only pertain to arranging funds from several sources, it also extends to various options of finance, locations, sectors, and participation of various stakeholders, and so on. And above all, prioritization of the investment is very important for financing nature conservation. Well, to respond to these questions, we have a very illustrious panel with us. And I would take a couple of minutes to introduce our panelists to the audience. Well, we have Mr. Pushpam Kumar, who is the Chief Environmental Economist and Senior Economic Advisor, United Nations Environmental Programme based out of Nairobi in Kenya. Dr. Pushpam leads the work on response to COVID-19, pollution and human capital, nature-based solutions, inclusive wealth, Sustainable Development Goals, and Nature-Human Development Nexus. He has been instrumental in designing, implementing, and providing leadership to the operationalization of concept of natural capital and its mainstreaming into developmental design and policy. Pushpam has a doctoral degree in environmental ecological economics. He publishes in peer-reviewed journals such as Science, Bioscience, Ecological Economics, MBO, Ecosystem Services, and International Development. His op-ed appears on leading forums including State of Planet, which is from Earth Institute of New York, and the World Economic Forum, Davos. We have Dr. Vinod Bihari Mathur, who is the chairman of National Biodiversity Authority, called as NBA. NBA is a statutory body of the Government of India for providing advisory and regulatory services on all matters relating to biodiversity conservation and management. Prior to joining NBA, Dr. Mathur served as at Wildlife Institute of India for 33 years in the capacity of Dean and then in the capacity of Director from 2014 to 2019. Dr. Mathur joined the Indian Forest Service and taught the 1983-85 batch of professional course of IFS at IGNFA Dehradun, and also the foundational law course at Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy at Missouri in 1985. He obtained his doctoral degree from University of Oxford, United Kingdom in 1991. He's the regional vice chair of IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas for South Asia and member of International Association of Impact Assessment. We have next on the panel Helen Mountford. Helen is the Vice President for Climate and Economics at the World Resources Institute at DC. The climate team helps policymakers, businesses, and civil society in countries around the world, and through international collaboration to identify and advance the deep structural shifts needed to successfully address climate change. The economics team supports work across WRI by integrating on economic approach as appropriate to strengthen the underlying analysis and impact of our work at WRI. Helen is the program director of the New Climate Economy Project, which is a very, very famous project. It is a flagship initiative of the Global Commission of the Economy and Climate that provides independent and authoritative evidence of actions which can both strengthen economic performance and reduce the risk of dangerous climate change. Helen previously worked as Deputy Director General of OECD, and then before that she worked on recycling schemes in England and worked for an NGO in Australia. She holds master's degree in environmental economics from University College of London and environmental management from University of Melbourne. She also has BA in philosophy and history. We are also joined by Mr. Ajay Narayan Jha, who is the 1982 batch Indian Administrative Service Officer of Manipur cadre. Mr. Jha has BA honors in MA history from St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and holds postgraduate degree in executive development from John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and has a certificate in French language as well. He also received a prize for master's degree in economic policy and management from McGill University of Canada and from the World Bank. He has served in various key positions of the Government of India as Finance Secretary of India, Union Expenditure Secretary, Union Environment, Forest and Climate Change Secretary, Secretary of the 14th Finance Commission of India, and for the Government of Manipur, he was Principal Secretary Finance, Principal Secretary Environment and Forest, Chairman of Manipur Renewable Energy Development Agency, Principal Secretary to the Chief Minister of Manipur, Secretary to the Government of Manipur, to name a few of his positions. Mr. Jha also served as consultant to the UNESCAPE, and he's currently member of the 15th Finance Commission. We're joined by Mr. Juha Sikkamaki, who is the Chief Economist at the International Union for Conservation of Nature, based out of Washington, DC at USA. He leads the IUCN Economics Unit within the Science and Economics Knowledge team of IUCN. He's a graduate of University of California at Davis and University of Helsinki with the unique combined skills focusing on environmental and natural resource economics, but also encompassing forestry, agronomy, and ecology. Throughout his career, Juha specialized in economics of ecosystems and nature, including economic valuation of ecosystem services, benefit cost evaluation of conservation programs, and spatial targeting of conservation investments. Juha has a broad publishing record and have more than 60 publications, including academic journal article in general economics, general interest science, environmental and resource economics, econometrics and ecology, focusing on exploring different aspects of conservation and ecosystem services. We are also joined by Mr. Andrew Harper, who is the Special Advisor of Climate Action at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva. He is responsible for providing strategic guidance, oversight, and expertise to shape UNHCR's climate action agenda. Prior to his current task, he was director of the Division of Program Support and Management, where he oversaw program policy, planning, and management, as well as technical support to field operations. He has led innovation service to UNHCR and and was responsible for leading and coordinating the international response to Syrian crisis in Jordan. Some of the main achievements, including responding to, at the time, the largest refugee crisis in the world, the establishment of Zatari and Arzak refugee camps, introducing biometric registration and linking that to world's largest biometric-based refugee cash assistance program. He also served as the head of desk at UNHCR, covering the Iraq situation, as well as emergency focal point of Middle East and North Africa region for Libyan crisis. He has previously worked notably for the Australian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, UNOCHA, and in various field locations of UNHCR, including Central and Southeast Asia, the Western Balkans, Islamic Republic, Iran, and Ukraine. So very hearty welcome all the panelists to this panel discussion. I would now start, without wasting much time, directly with the questions to the experts. I'll start with, Pushpam Kumar to respond to our queries regarding the COVID crisis and how nature-based solutions can respond to COVID crisis. Yes, Pushpam. So we have, we all know that global economy has witnessed an injection of more than 9 trillion USD to recover from COVID-19 pandemic. India's 20 trillion INR relief package, amongst the largest in the world, amounts to roughly 10% of the country's GDP, which is nothing but the proxy value of loss of biodiversity resulting from deforestation, loss of wildlife, and increase in contagious diseases. We now pay heavy cost of our inaction, whereas we would proactively have invested in nature to avoid such consequences. My question to you is, how to bring nature and biodiversity in the relief package? Over to you, Pushpam. We can't hear you, Pushpam. Can you just unmute?
Yep. Thank you, Madhu, and my compliments to the organizers, my colleague Atul Bagai from UNEP and Madhu you for doing this. This topic is very relevant, and I hope that some action and receptivity from the policymakers at the national scale would follow. Going back to your question, I would frame my answer in, you will have to mute your phone. Sorry. So 3 things I would like to mention here. Number 1, what is the backdrop of the problem? Second, what is the relief package we are referring to? And third, your question, Madhu, that how nature and biodiversity and probably climate change can be built into this. Now, as you know, just a second. So this COVID-19 has brought 2 pandemics. One is, of course, health pandemics, and the millions of people being infected, and around 400,000 people have died. In India, of course, you are in Delhi, and many of you who are in other parts of India know the problem. But in this news and the conundrum of news of this pandemic, the main issue has gone into the background. The main issue is, of course, this pandemic has brought 2 pandemic. One is health, another is economic. We know the loss of job. So the economic recession has started, and people have already started estimating that this depression will be much deeper than the Great Depression of 1930s. Output has started shrinking. Employment has shrunk like anything. and then other kind of disturbances have started following up. But this problem has arisen, which is basically from the symptom of dysfunction between the nature and the humans. As we know that, as Atul was very perceptive in mentioning one of the UNEP's report, which came in 2016, that report very categorically says that 60% of all the infectious diseases in humans are zoonotic in nature. Zoonotic means that coming from the animals or birds and going to the human body, sometimes directly, sometimes via other sources. Uh, then we, in last few years, we are, at least for last 20 years, 3 or 4 new diseases have started cropping up, and they are new. Even the medical professionals, they don't know about it. Some of my colleagues from Liverpool have just made a forecast that we have survived other pandemics in the past, like SARS or Ebola or MERS, but this pandemic has not spared us. And then we know the result. And this is not the last one. It is possible that we might face another pandemic very, very soon. When? Exact time is not known. Why this is happening? I mean, there are various reasons. Anthropocentric drivers, climate change are causing this, because you have genotopes, the genotic maps, and genotopes areas are now shrinking due to the simple fact of the agricultural expansion, the climate change, then you have intensive farming, then you have illegal trade of wildlife, bushmeat, fragmentation of habitat. So this pandemic and other pandemic as well, which are coming from zoonotic diseases, are primarily due to the destruction of nature, destruction of biodiversity. So that we have to. Why this is happening? Because the way the era of Anthropocene, that is what we call it, has started, operating. Recently, last month, I think one of the report which came from UK's Treasury, HM Treasury, and led by Sir Partha Das Gupta of Cambridge, they have estimated that since 1950, the output has increased by 15 times, but employment population has increased 3 times. So this 5% per capita growth has happened at the cost of what we call natural capital. What are the natural capital? There are various estimates coming up. I mean, IP-based report, international scientific body, is saying that 1 million species are under risk of extinction every year. We know that during 1996 and 2010, we have lost 15% mangroves. Then, since 1950 until 1990, we have lost half of the wildlife. So, what I'm trying to highlight through these examples and numbers, that nature is under constant threat from the anthropocentric drivers and the pressures. Second, climate change has its own implications, and that my biophysical scientist in the panel can say more on that. Now, and in this climate or situation where wilds have been domesticated, so whether it came from the birds and went through pangolin to, and the human body became receptor, that is not the point. But the point is that we have destroyed or subverted our relationship with nature. So, and that's why, Madhu, you were absolutely correct that if that is the root cause, how the solution can be devoid of it. Now, in India, the impact is mammoth. I mean, the worldwide, the impact is mammoth. In India too, because the problem is slightly different from the rest of the world. Of course, in India also, we have a job issues, we have the growth issue, we have the stability issues. And that's why a series of packages, relief packages, have started putting in. Globally, as we know, when we are speaking, we are touching nearly 11 trillion US dollar, the relief package. In India, Indian Prime Minister announced 20 lakhs crore, which is roughly, for the colleagues who might not know this, lakhs and crores, around $300 billion. And now, I will build upon my answer on the what is happening elsewhere. You have European New Green Deal. Under that, you have various packages announcement from Denmark, from Germany, from other countries. And in those countries, I can see that there is a proper emphasis on various steps and intervention, which is, of course, to create jobs and bring back the economy to the normal. But they are devoting considerable amount of resources on the green purchases. For example, in Denmark, 300 million euro is especially devoted to the green purchase or the green vehicles. In Germany, for example, they are incentivizing green investment, especially in construction sector. Then you have South Korean examples where a lot of resources, if you ask me, around 24 trillion South Korean currency is devoted on green industries, including protection of the protected areas. Then we have examples from Lithuania, which has gone ahead and they are co-financing climate change. They have increased their contribution to Green Climate Fund and a lot of incentive on mitigation and adaptation strategies are in place. Now, how then? And then, of course, the issues of biodiversity conservation is separate. In India, the issue is slightly different. You have the issues of migrant workers, non-farm laborers, and informal sectors. I don't want to repeat the obvious story, what is happening on the streets in UP and Bihar, and it is a serious issue. 400 million people, roughly 400 million people, have been pushed into the extreme poverty line. Extreme poverty means $1.9 here. So 400 additional what was already there in Indian economy. And in that context, I think now I will come to the very quick 4 or 5 points how nature can be built into the relief packages. Of course, we live in the same world where people are starving and dying and they are having no jobs. We can't think of peacock and parrots. Sure, yeah, but then we have to harvest the growth where we have highest employment generation potential. Second, a lot of activities can be built around nature-based solution. You have Manrega, right? You have other watershed management program. People who come from Indian Forest Service can know more about it. Those schemes have great potential to create job. Even Manrega, of course, good that the Indian government has pumped new resources to Manrega, but Manrega needs to be reoriented. We have to put a lot of resources on social forestry again, wetland restorations, ecotourism, and entire narrative of new economy where the growth is extracted from the nature without compromising their resilience of ecosystem, and there are clear-cut activities in place that can be done. Finally, biodiversity conservation, not because they create jobs, but interfering with them, interfering with their resilience and robustness has the implications for this pandemic. We should not touch the wild. Wild should be kept in the wild and should be left for the wild. But then we have to analyze sector-wise, and a lot of nature-based activities can be built into this 20 lakhs crore. I
Sure.
know I have been very broad, sweep kind of thing, but I will be happy to take the question when it comes, and I would stop myself here so that I'm within the time limit. Thank you, Madhu.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pushpam. You really built in the connect between kind of assessment processes being done by different reports, and definitely they have been taken forward. In fact, not to the extent to which they should have been taken seriously, but now it's high time that all the outcomes which come out of the huge amount of effort of academia, policymakers, researchers, scientists, they give a lot of information to us, should be seriously considered and built into our planning process. Thank you, Pushpam, so much. Now this takes me to Dr. Zuha Sikamaki, who is Chief Economist at IUCN. And what you just suggested, Pushpam, the question now, our next question connects to Zuha. Well, Zuha, as Pushpam rightly said, the pandemic came from the disturbance of nature, and its treatment also lies in nature, rebuilding and investing in natural capital. The World Economic Forum recently noted that every dollar spent on nature restoration would result in almost $9 worth of economic benefits. It is said that nature-based solutions are the most cost-effective ways to build resilient ecological infrastructure devoted to sustainable well-being. IUCN itself has given a formal definition of nature-based solutions. So my question to you is, do you think nature-based solutions shall be a suitable potential option to meet challenges posed by current pandemic? And would they be able to support green and inclusive economic recovery? Over to you, Zuha.
Thank you, Madhu. And thank you, first of all, to WRI and partners for organizing this webinar on this extremely important topic. I think my brief answer and a preview of my comments is that nature-based solutions can play a significant role in helping economies move towards a green recovery. But let me say a few more words by way of background why I think that's why we think that this is the case. Now, before we think about nature-based solutions as a tool for green and inclusive recovery, let's again recognize the vast human and economic cost of the pandemic. This was Pushpam already mentioned this, but the challenge is simply daunting and unparalleled in some 100 years, both in terms of the health expense, health cost, tragic, and the economic impacts. And the economic impacts, as well as the health impacts, we're only understanding part of it because the pandemic is still very much what's underway. Economic impacts are immediate and they're dire. Just yesterday, OECD released their latest estimates of the economic impact, forecasting from 6% to 7.6% decline globally in GDP this year, depending on the severity of the pandemic in the second half of the 2020. Job losses are unprecedented. In fact, the vast majority of the world's workers have been impacted by the pandemic and restrictions associated with it. And this has to do with effectively every country in the world. In India, I understand that unemployment rate has skyrocketed for months of April already, being above 20%. And economy is also expected to contract towards the end of during the end of the 2020 and also continuing into 2021. So these numbers are really daunting. The challenge is great. And at the same time, we recognize that the need for economic stimulus and recovery is also great and immediate. So from that viewpoint, it really seems appealing to focus mostly on economy. Let's take care of the health problem, let's take care of the economic problem, and then we may have time and resources to consider other critical issues, issues such as ongoing crisis with nature and biodiversity. But what I want to point out here is that this is a completely false dichotomy. These are not opposing goals. Rather, we must keep in mind long-term goals for the society, for the economies. We need to move towards a more sustainable and inclusive economy while also focusing in economic recovery. In fact, the pandemic in many ways shows that the linkages between nature and economy are even more critical than we've come to appreciate over the last several decades. So thinking about nature and economy jointly, in fact, helps us to be more effective in economic recovery. It is a clear need, and it's also in some ways an opportunity that we have in front of us. Now, this is where nature-based solutions can be a considerable part of the solutions. In many countries, they can provide some of the key options to to both stimulate the economy in the near term, while also keeping in mind the long-term goal of building a sustainable, inclusive society.
Sure.
You know, a clear advantage of nature-based solutions is that they're also quite readily available. In many cases, we find that they're cost-effective. They offer ways of addressing societal challenges at costs that are competitive or even below the ways of addressing the same goals using other solutions, say a gray infrastructure or other kinds of interventions. These are also investments that could be expedited in the interest of economic recovery. The scale is there and the opportunity is there. So let me say a few words about what nature-based solutions actually are. And in brief, they're simply solutions that are based on nature to address key societal challenges. These are solutions that benefit both society and the environment. Nature-based solutions concern natural ecosystems, but they also concern ecosystems that are human modified. Many of the ecosystems around the world have a human imprint on them. These are very much targets of nature-based solutions. Oftentimes, nature-based solutions can be a way of restoring those ecosystems, benefit the environment, but benefit the society at the same time. Nature-based solutions can be also hybrid solutions. They can be part nature, they can be part conventional. We need to be flexible and practical in this regard. Now, in recent years, climate-focused nature-based solutions have been receiving the key focus here. You know, for example, we know that we might be able to achieve about 1/3 of the need to mitigate greenhouse gases to stay on track for the 1.5–2 degrees target agreed upon in Paris to 2015. Those nature-based climate solutions are readily available. They're cost-effective. They're effective in meeting greenhouse gas emission goals. It's important to note that nature-based solutions are critical to climate, but there are also a wide range of other nature-based solutions that are available. A number of societal challenges can be addressed through them. We can focus on water issues, water availability and water quality. There's a clear need and opportunity to manage nature to mitigate the disaster risks through coastal protection of landslides. Flood control is another area. Regulation of air quality and temperature. This is critical, especially in urban areas. We can improve food security by making our food systems more sustainable, more productive. We can focus on energy, also as a nature-based solution. It's clearly a critical method to advance biodiversity conservation. Often the critical global challenge that is similar to the climate challenge, but not maybe receiving the same sort of attention. Nature-based solutions are critical to public health. We can use nature-based solutions to managing health risks, which we're now so familiar with, but we can also manage nature to contribute for improved health and well-being in a more proactive and positive fashions. And so just let me just note that nature-based solutions are also unique relative to conventional solutions that they address multiple societal targets through the same solution at once. So you get more than one bird with one stone. And this breadth of range is typically not available for more conventional investments in economic stimulus. So again, you know, we think that the nature-based solutions can play a key role in economic recovery. They're available in the near term. They're cost-effective in addressing many key societal goals. Nature-based solutions are sizable in need and scale. They reach the levels of investment that are needed that can make a material difference in the economy. They can make a dent in the economic depression. There's a sizable upfront investment needed. It can be quite effective in creating jobs. At the same time, they are investments in natural capital that then can give us long-term returns through improved sustainability, improved productivity. That's in everybody's interest, globally and locally.
So you make a very strong case of nature-based solutions. They can be good for environment, society, and economic recovery. Let me take advantage of you being on the panel and ask a specific question for India. Can you give some specific examples of the potential for nature-based solutions in this context? Are these examples particularly relevant to India?
Yes, that's a good question. You know, this is all very good in concept, but the question, of course, is how does it work in practice? So let's talk about some real options. And you know, given the limited time available, I'm going to focus on landscape restoration as a nature-based solution. It's very important globally, and it's also very relevant, from what I understand, in India. Globally, land degradation is a major problem. It's been estimated that about 1/4 of the world's agricultural land is highly degraded. UN estimates that more than 3.2 billion people around the world are at risk from the effects of land degradation. Many of these people impacted are among the poorest, among the most in need. In India, I understand land degradation is also a considerable challenge, and fortunately is recognized as such. It's an environmental problem, but it's also an economic one. There's a recent study by the Energy and Resources Institute that shows that the land degradation in India has led to roughly 2.5% loss of the country's economic output in recent years, including about almost 16% of the value added from agriculture, forestry, and fishing sectors. So this is a sizable issue. Now, India has responded to this, and in particular, in response to the Bond Challenge, India made ambitious commitments to restoration, including a total of 21 million of hectares committed to restoration by 2030. And this commitment, you know, fulfilled would give roughly 2 gigatons of carbon dioxide saved, the several $billion worth of benefits that would be secured. And since these comments, India has then further made commitments to restoration, including about 5 million hectares of degraded land restored by 2030. So this leaves the total in about 26 million hectares. And so this is a large area of land, but you know, it's recognized that even that may not be enough. India is reporting that roughly 30% of land area has been degraded. So there's a huge potential to go even beyond the 30 million hectares.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, surely, because we do have lots of backward and forward linkages of a particular ecosystem with the other ecosystems. The whole mosaic of ecosystems need to be considered in the landscape restoration activity. So it's a very, very pertinent answer for India. Thank you very much, Zoha, for giving us a lot of insight about nature-based solutions and landscape restoration work, which could be potential work for a country like India. Now I'll move now to Helen Mountford. Helen is the Vice President of Climate and Economics at WRI-India DC office. Well, Helen, you are heading the Economics and Climate and Economics division, and then you also lead a flagship report on called as, you know, new climate economy report. Well, several questions when we are facing this kind of a problem, Helen, we are facing several questions which are hammering our mind these days. Has coronavirus made the climate change worse and vice versa? Do weather and climate determine where COVID-19 will occur? Does climate change affect the transmission of coronavirus? Will fixing climate change fix the outbreak of pandemics? Are COVID and climate change linked or independent events? Do they have common solutions? I would also like to link these questions to recent articles. I was quite impressed to read your article published on the World Environment Day titled as From COVID to Climate, this convergence of crisis calls for a convergence of solutions. So question to you, Helen, is what can we learn from the mistakes of the past on climate change and COVID? And linked to that, what are these solutions and how they can be converged? Does the flagship report on new climate economy that you are leading provides any such solutions which may also be useful for India to address both the crises? Over to you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Madhu, and to all the panelists and everyone participating. It's great to be in this discussion. I do think, and this builds very much on what other colleagues have said on this panel, we see from COVID just how interconnected our systems are. Economic well-being is very much dependent on human health, and human health is dependent on ecosystem health. They're interconnected and you can't ignore that. And this is one of the things that I think has been one of the most powerful lessons coming out of this crisis, how they connect together. We do see it as a convergence of crises. There's certainly the health crisis. Hot on the heels of the health crisis, we have the economic and employment or income crisis. In many countries, we're seeing huge levels of unemployment, a real risk to income for large parts of the population, formal or informal. But that's also built on a basis of the crisis of climate change, the crisis of air pollution in many regions, and of course, a crisis of inequality. So we have this convergence of crises, and we need to look for solutions coming out of the COVID-19 crisis that can actually address these together. So let me highlight sort of 3 lessons I think we've learned from climate change in the past and the work we've done, but also from previous economic recessions, and what can we do to build back better from this one this time. So first lesson is listen to the scientists. Second lesson is green is actually better for growth and jobs. It's not a trade-off. And then third lesson is that we don't need just the stimulus, and you talked about what the Indian government is committing in terms of economic stimulus, which is really impressive, but to complement the stimulus, we need policies as well. So let me talk about those 3 just very briefly. So first, listen to the scientists. I think, you know, for most of us participating in this, coming from a background linked to either climate or ecosystems or understanding these systems, we understand how important it is to listen to the scientists, take their advice, understand the risks. And I think more than ever to reduce the risk of the next pandemic or natural disaster. As others said, this has been a shock, obviously, for the world economy, for people around the world. But as we look at the future, as we look at building climate risk, as we look at reduced ecosystem health, we have future natural disasters coming down the pipeline and potential pandemics as well. And we know that, of course, climate change is linked to the spread of infectious diseases. So as we have more climate impacts, we're going to have more spread of infectious diseases, as well as disasters, flooding, droughts, heat waves, which affect communities around the world. So why don't we go ahead now and reduce those risks for the future pandemics or natural disasters? So first, listen to the scientists. Second, green is better for growth and jobs. We have evidence of this building around the world. It is now very, very clear that in many cases, the green solutions, whether it's about nature-based solutions or it's about, such as green infrastructure, or it's about renewable energy, battery storage, public transport, these tend to be cheaper. They're getting more and more cheaper and cost competitive with the alternatives. They tend to bring a lot of other benefits with them, which are often not valued. And we need to start to value those, whether that's, for example, the air pollution benefits of moving to public transport and renewable energy, or that's the benefits to water systems, to carbon absorption, et cetera, of investments in green infrastructure. What we've also seen, interestingly, from the 2008-2009 crisis is that there were great benefits from the green stimulus that was used there. As Pushpan mentioned, we've got a number of countries now looking at doing green stimulus for this current pandemic. The European Union is definitely leading the way, but not only. Chile has very clearly said that they are going to increase their climate ambition. They said this in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they said they will use that as an instrument to help address economic recovery and inequalities in Chile as well. So they're connecting them together, climate action with economic recovery with addressing inequalities. And we're seeing it in South Korea as well. South Korea, incidentally, in 2008-2009 was the country that invested by far the most of its stimulus package, about 69%. In green solutions, so quite a significant bump. It was also one of the countries that bounced back the quickest, had the lowest level of unemployment during that crisis, and its GDP bounced back quickly. So they are again looking at how they can do a green stimulus. But we also saw, and we've got good examples from Europe, from Canada, from the US, that in fact investing, for example, in infrastructure around energy efficiency in buildings or in industry, investing in renewable energy tends to generate about double the amount of jobs as the same investment in fossil fuels. Double the jobs. So as you're looking now for infrastructure investments that will boost employment and income, we should be looking at renewable energy, energy efficiency, rather than at fossil fuels. Similarly, we found that in the US, at least in the last stimulus packages, those states that invested in public transport generated about 70% more jobs than those who invested in highways. So as you're looking again to look at things like investment in infrastructure for transport, there's an option there. I think we need to draw out the same kinds of numbers and analysis and information around green infrastructure investments. Juha mentioned a number in terms of landscape restoration. We know landscape restoration can deliver really incomes, jobs, food security for rural populations, incredibly important, but often we don't have those numbers to hand. We know what it means for carbon or for the landscape. So how do we get more of those numbers out about the benefits? And all of this is very much something that's supported through the work of the New Climate Economy. We've seen very clearly in countries around the world and globally that bold climate action will deliver more growth, faster GDP growth, more poverty alleviation in a quicker way. It will deliver more jobs and it will deliver health benefits. So we've got a strong evidence base there. The third point is really about the policies. In the 2008-2009 stimulus, there was a lot of investment, particularly in infrastructure, but these weren't necessarily accompanied with the policies that would make the results last long term. So this is one we're looking at now very much, how can you use, for example, fiscal instruments, carbon taxes, reform of subsidies as a way to actually build in a long-lasting effect from the stimulus packages so that going forward, we're on a much more sustainable and inclusive growth path, but also as a way to raise much needed resources for finance ministries and others to actually fund these packages. So this is a way where we've got inefficient subsidies that we can reform, where we can actually raise some taxes and put a value on, put a price on pollution and put a value on natural resources. That is a way that we can actually raise some of the revenues we need also for government expenditures. So let me stop there. 3 main lessons. Listen to the scientists. Green is good for growth and jobs, and we need the policies, not just a stimulus.
Yeah, you very much highlighted the role of economic instruments that would play to conserve biodiversity and set the economy back on the trajectory of development. So thank you very much, Helen, for very useful insights you've given to us and a lot of further pointers to do intensive research to inform policymakers better. So now thank you, Helen, very much. I move to Mr. Ajay Narayan Jha, member of 15th Finance Commission. Sir, you held very, very important positions in your career. You were Secretary, 14th Finance Commission, you were Ministry of Environment and Forest Secretary, then you were Expenditure Secretary and Secretary Finance, and now you're in the 15th Finance Commission member. I mean, you know the story very well, I should say. So recently the Ministry of Home Affairs, after the COVID happened, it notified COVID-19 as disaster, which meant that the state governments could draw from the State Disaster Risk Management Fund for relief measures during lockdown, and there is need for increased allocation to this fund. At the same time, the economy has slowed down, leading to loss of revenue base to the government. My question to you is, sir, in the light of current situation, how 15th Finance Commission is addressing the new reality, that is a new normal, for realigning its allocations for post-pandemic requirements for the coming years of its awards? We still have 4 more years to go with the awards of the 15th Finance Commission. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Madhuji. Very good evening to all the participants in today's webinar, as well as the audience which is watching us and hearing us. I take this opportunity to, first of all, thank WRI for having invited me to join this webinar. I must say the speakers before me have covered a wide range of issues and the problems and challenges that lie ahead for us. But I'll try and answer your very specific question about the new reality and how the Finance Commission will be approaching this problem. But before I come to the specific question, let me give you a very brief perspective on what the Finance Commission does. It is mandated under the Constitution to be the body responsible for determining intergovernmental transfers of taxes between the central government and the state governments, and also to consider the needs for grants to be given to the states for different type of specific subjects or for specific purposes or untied grants. The Commission's main task is to recommend a scheme of transfers that could serve the objectives of both equity and efficiency and result in transfers that are predictable and stable over a medium term. The Commission, in its task, also takes cognizance of the prevailing macro and fiscal situation, particularly the need to sustain growth momentum while bringing about and sustaining fiscal consolidation. In view of the constraint of time, I will skip the rationale for intergovernmental transfers and come straight to the manner in which the Finance Commission carries out its job. In deciding the quantum of transfers, we look at the supply side of funds and the demand side of funds. Availability of central revenues after accounting for the relevant expenditure requirements of the central government in a way represents the supply side of funds in the context of our intergovernmental transfers. It is done by assessment of the overall budgetary requirements of the center, that is its resources, both tax and non-tax, and its expenditure requirements to determine the volume of revenues and resources that can be transferred to the states during the period of the award. The demand side of the funds, on the other hand, arises from two considerations: the larger assignment of responsibilities under the Constitution to the state governments considered together, and the need for ensuring minimum provision of services by the states with less than average fiscal capacities. This involves forecasting states' own current revenues and current revenue expenditures. The supply of transferable funds is influenced by the ability of the central government to raise taxes or prudently borrow or control expenditures. Just to give you an insight, the center collects 63% of the combined taxes before transfer and transfers 32% out of this to the states. In the combined expenditure of the center and the states spend about 55 to 56%, whereas the central government spends about 44 to 45% only. And this percentage has remained stable for decades since the 60s. Therefore, it is important for the 15th Finance Commission to ensure that the medium-term framework for intergovernmental resource allocation allows all tiers of the government to be reasonably certain about the resources at their disposal in order to undertake the respective expenditure assignments. Stability and predictability of resources becomes critical in our functioning. But this year, we are confronted with an unprecedented pandemic leading to a lockdown that has impacted the economic system in multiple ways. It's a global challenge. No sector of the economy, fiscal, monetary, financial, and real, has escaped the adverse fallout. In fact, as one of the speakers before me mentioned, the GDP decline is estimated to go down by about 20 to 40% in the current year. And we are likely to go into a negative GDP territory this year. As a consequence, the assessment of GDP growth for the year 2021 and beyond for the next 5 years that we are supposed to take into account becomes extremely challenging. The tax receipts of the center and the states, debt and fiscal deficits, and projections for the future trajectory of the economy are both uncertain and unpredictable. Therefore, calibrating our approach has to be balanced, keeping in view the revenue-raising possibilities that exist in today's environment, the expanded expenditure commitments, particularly on health interventions, infrastructure, income generation, and employment creation opportunities. Just to give you an example, you mentioned the State Disaster Relief Fund, which is essentially by way of what is called a contingent expenditure. It is for events that may happen or may not happen. The fund is designed to tackle natural disasters like flood, drought, cyclone, etc. These are, as we are all aware, sporadic and confined to a specific state or at best a group of states. Data from previous years indicate that all states never used the SDRF allocations fully. Consequently, in the past, the funds were made non-lapsable so that the balances could be carried forward from year to year. And in fixing the size of the fund, the finance commissions relied on standard principle of limiting the size of the SDRF on the basis of past expenditure trend with inflation indexing. For 2021, we doubled the outlays over 1919-20 from almost 13,500 crores to 28,900 crores, 29,000 crores. But there was no precedence of the fund requirement of a pandemic which impacted all the states of the country simultaneously, and where clearly the existing outlays are proving to be insufficient. So how do you forecast for such an event over a 5-year period? This is just a small example of the challenge that lies ahead for the Finance Commission. But this example will give you an indication of the challenge which we confront. Both over-projection and underestimation have deleterious consequences on the fiscal health of the country, especially at a point of time when the combined finances of both the center and the states are stressed, and requirement for investment in physical and health infrastructure, human resources, basic services like health, water and sanitation, defense of the country, security, science and technology, all need to grow by a magnitude. We are also very conscious of the green concerns which are there as a result of this pandemic and the need for balancing nature and economic growth together. But I leave this issue at that with the assurance that we are fully conscious of the challenges and the need in the present context to find the optimal balance of distribution of resources so that all states get an equitable share and do not have to face the consequences of fiscal stress.
Yes, very true, sir. This takes me to another question that, it is very ironic that in the year which was supposed to be a big year for biodiversity, rather a super year by the United Nations, the pandemic has emerged due to promiscuous treatment of nature and biodiversity. Thus, if one lesson is learned from COVID-19 is that we need to get serious about conserving biodiversity, investing in its conservation and restoration as prepare for more severe and frequent crises. My question to you, sir, is how can India demonstrate that bringing nature to the center of economy is possible, and which sectors can be priority in building back better?
Thank you for asking this question, because this takes me back to my earlier experience as Environment Secretary also in the Government of India, where this was one of the things which I was grappling with frontally. In India, financing for environmental protection, I'm using the term in a very broad sense, has come because of very unconventional interventions. State funding of forests was there from British time, but it was more because forests were seen as source of revenue. With forests no longer being source of revenue since the 90s, state expenditures have plateaued. Funding for environment, biodiversity, etc. is more a recent phenomenon, and the total investments are minuscule proportion of the GDP. But what distinguishes India from many countries are the interventions for actions coming from outside the government. The first example that comes to my mind is CAMPA, the Compensatory Forest Management Fund. It was created through an order of the Supreme Court in 2002, in which all monies received from the user agencies towards compensatory forestation, etc., net present value of the diverted forest land or catchment area treatment plan got deposited. Now we have an act passed in 2016 to regulate the funds accrued into CAMPA. The size, the corpus of the fund today is almost 60,000 crores plus, which is, by my calculation, about 7 to 8 billion US dollars, which is lying as unutilized money under CAMPA. The use of funds under the NPV and interest component of CAMPA, which is almost 2/3 of the total corpus, are adequately flexible to build in broader nature conservation activities and not confined to forestry or wildlife alone. In the recent announcement of the finance minister, you would have noticed that 6,000 crores from CAMPA was part of the economic revival package which was announced. The second major intervention, which came from the finance commissions. Many of you may be aware that the 12th and the 13th finance commissions, which were there in the past almost 2 decades ago, had provided for specific purpose grants for forests, but these were very limited. The 14th Finance Commission, and Madhu Verma ji has been part of those deliberations in the 14th Finance Commission, provided a quantum leap to natural resource financing by incorporating in the devolution formula the extent of forest covers in the states. Over a 5-year period, almost 50,000 crores, that is equivalent in US dollars of 6 billion, flowed every year to the states on this. The 15th Finance Commission has not only continued with the formula, but has increased the share from 7.5% to 10% for the year 2021. This money, of course, is untied. The states are free to spend it on anything, and typically the budgets of our environment, forest, biodiversity has not gone up beyond the normal levels. The 14th FC incidentally had noted that forests as global public good should not be seen as a handicap, but as a natural resource to be preserved and expanded to full potential, including afforestation in degraded forests or forests with low density cover. They also recognize that maintaining green cover and adding to it would also enable the nation to meet its environmental obligations on environment-related measures. Unfortunately, that incentive built into the formula did not materialize with the states. With the lessons learned from COVID-19, the states need to recognize that investment in nature should be prioritized from the available funds, which are adequate, in my view, to reap the benefits both for future transfers and for balancing economy and environment. Incidentally, the 15th Finance Commission has also provided very generously for pollution prevention in major cities of the country. All metropolitan cities are to get a sizable amount of money for efforts to be made for pollution, air pollution control. Two other things which I would highlight just briefly. One is the Environmental Protection Act of 1986 provided for corporate environmental responsibility for every project, which involves capital expenditure by new projects on environmental mitigation. This ranged from about 2 to 8%, 10% of the total project cost of the new projects which are given environmental clearance. What I would highlight here is that how do we make it more effective and drive private and public sector investments towards mitigation and adaptation using these funds which are available to the project proponents. The Ministry of Forests has requisite manpower and data to drive these investments, particularly in mining, power, infra projects like roads, ports, construction, etc. The last thing which I would like to flag is the corporate social responsibility, which involves the private sector. If you look at the investments that have come from the private sector for environmental protection or for nature conservation, it is barely 5 to 6% of the total CSR spend of the corporates. Now, this, of course, can be increased, especially considering now the challenges that have come about and the realization that has come about the nature of the pandemic, and how, because we have neglected nature and natural protection over the years, these type of problems become more intense and more acute for the economy.
Sure.
But before I close, I'll just like to end with the fact that India has had a long history and tradition of harmonious coexistence between man and nature. And this we have recognized, and we also recognize, we continue to recognize this. And our path, future path, needs to shift to sustainable harnessing of our nature and environment with growth and development. Use of technology will be as critical as finance. And I'm quite sanguine that once we start utilizing the funds which are already available under CAMPA and through part of the share of devolved taxes, complemented by CSR and CER, the states will have adequate resources to focus on a multi-pronged integrated strategy, including mobilization and active engagement of forest communities, different stakeholders, and partners on the ground in designing and implementing various nature conservation and forestry programs and plans. I would just like to end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving us a kind of status situation, what exists currently and how Finance Commission is trying to handle the situation, and also giving us kind of a reality check about various other funds which are being used for the purpose of mitigating the damage we're facing on account of COVID-19. This takes me to Andrew Harper, because Andrew works a lot on the climate-induced refugees, and we have now the major fallout of pandemic is COVID-induced migrants. So Andrew, we know that impacts of climate change on vulnerable populations, resulting in population displacement, whether within the country or cross-border, has further been compounded due to COVID-19. And then there has been environmental migrants due to other disasters as well. My question to you is a lot of confusion about the terminology and also, the categories that we have in front in terms of various categories of migrants. The question to you is, can the climate migrant be termed as climate refugee? And who takes the responsibility of climate migrants?
Okay, and thank you very much for having us on for today. It's been very, very interesting and illuminating for me just to hear the discussions, particularly in relation to the challenges that India has. As you quite rightly mentioned, terminology means a lot, particularly when you're talking about displaced populations. And in this regards, my answer is pretty simple, because the term climate refugee is not based on international law. Although the very image that it conveys is probably appropriate. It's people who have been forced to, due to no fault of their own, from their homes and their communities. So while it doesn't exist in international law, and so we can't sort of say what is our position, the very fact that populations are being forced due to slow onset impact of climate change or due to disasters is something that the world has to be increasingly aware of. And something like a country like India is very much at the forefront of those impacts. And I think even last year, India suffered a lot from cyclones and from droughts and other issues, which goes back to my second point, which is who is responsible. In the end, the vast majority of people who are being displaced by climate or by extreme weather events find safety within their own communities. They may be displaced from their homes, but they're generally internally displaced. So what we as an international organization dealing with protection, our key role is to support governments and communities do what they've been doing for generations, which is provide support to their own populations. But that being said, what COVID is illustrating is that everyone is being stretched. No one has got the resources that they once had. We have to be thinking in a much more sustainable manner, and we have to be looking in a way which is focused on nature, focused on a world that we wish to move towards, not one which we've dealt with in the past. And it was interesting discussion in relation to the previous investments in forestry and the fact that forests were not really perceived as having a value. And we have to change the way in which the world thinks. And I think one of the greatest disappointments that came out of the COP discussions in Madrid last year was that no one could even understand or realize what the value of what carbon emissions were. So hopefully, as a human being, not as a representative of the UN here, that we can use COVID as a wake-up call for the world to say, look, we need to be, we're all in this together. What happens in an industrial country, in a developed country, in a country that's been pumping carbon into the atmosphere will have an impact in isolated parts of the world, and I think you know this very well, that it's often the countries who have committed so little to the current calamity that are going to suffer the most. And if you look at this in the African states, if you look at the small island developing states, they're the ones who are going to have to be dealing with populations who, again, largely to no fault of their own, are going to have to move because you have either rising sea levels or you've got places which start becoming uninhabitable. So it's not necessarily an issue that we get fixated on in relation to what status these people are. I think as the UN, we have to be focused on the vulnerability, because an interesting element in studies that have been undertaken of people being made more vulnerable by climate change and extreme weather events is that it's often the very poor that can't even move. So it's the populations who do not have the resources or the linkages outside and who get stuck in a desert or get stuck in a location and they've got no opportunities. So vulnerability of populations is probably my key issue as a representative of the UN. And then as a representative of UNHCR, trying to see how we can work with communities and governments in particular to try and avoid people having to cross a border to become a refugee. And there's been discussions and there's multitude of examples from the Sahel in Africa to South Asia to elsewhere, where populations move due to a combination of reasons. And in the past, people would sort of say, well, they're a refugee because there was a war, and that war, people had to flee across a border. What's happening now is that there could be a whole host of reasons why people are moving. People could be moving because of a lack of livelihoods, but those lack of livelihoods also could be compounded by the engagement of extremist groups, or could be could be an issue of corruption, a lack of governance, a lack of hope. And often at the last point, it's violence, conflict, fragility, displacement. So we see that the issue of climate change really is and you mentioned it before in your opening, that climate change is a threat multiplier, a risk multiplier. It's making situations even more delicate and more complex than what they have been before. And even if we thought the world was already complicated, COVID-19 has thrown another spanner into the works to sort of say, look, you think it was hard before? We're also going to make it that little bit more difficult for you now. So we look also to particularly countries like India that have had so much experience in dealing with people moving due to different situations. It could be due to climate, drought, cyclones, and see how we can do things better. Like the recent cyclones that you've had in the Bay of Bengal have been as you know, have been the strongest ever recorded. As a refugee agency, we're very concerned about what could potentially happen if the next cyclone heads a bit further south towards Cox's Bazar and hits the world's largest refugee camp in Kutupalong in Bangladesh. So as a refugee agency, we find that many people who have been displaced are often hosted in the most, let's say, not most attractive locations in the world, because when a country or a community is generous enough to provide support to refugees, they don't necessarily have the space in order to give them the best land. Like just giving them that protection is largely all that's required. But those areas are often very vulnerable to climate change. So what we seek to do is to learn from populations, communities, how they adapt and how do they mitigate what the impact of extreme weather events. And so that we learn from those communities. And that's something which we'll be looking at, particularly between now and the end of this year. What are the ways in which communities, say for instance, South Asia, prepare for cyclones? How do they prepare for more frequent flooding? And then also learn from them about what we can be doing to mitigate, again, as a collective, not to try and invest in projects which are short-term ad hoc. How can we invest in the national development programs of the government? How can we build upon the best practices? Because there's been so many initiatives that have not worked in relation to dealing with climate and adaptation and mitigation. What we now need to do is focus on what does work and look to learn from the people on the ground. Over.
So this takes me to the next question, because you have been working as an agency with some 70 million forcibly displaced people around the world. So what are the opportunities you see for post-COVID to accelerate the transition to a more sustainable job market and economy? And what kind of livelihoods options can be created simultaneously with rebuilding nature to address the unemployment issues of COVID-induced displaced populations?
It's a very good question, because I think the worst thing that we can do is go back to what we were doing before. We've got to use this as a reality check, as a reboot, and almost question everything which we do. Put it in every decision should go through a climate lens. Every decision should be based on learning from the people on the ground, where I would say they know best. But as part of the UN, there is, and this is where the Secretary General has been very strong, where he's saying we have to build back better. It's not just build back. We need to build back better through a green lens. And one of the other panelists mentioned what the EU was pushing for through the Green Deal. I think that's a very good example that if we're going to invest in recovery, then let's not waste the money. Let's not be focusing on fossil fuels. Let's not be focusing on destructive practices. So looking at green transition, looking to see how we can ultimately move from sort of grey industries to green industries. How can we stop the subsidies for polluters, which receive a lot of money across the world? And again, focusing on how can we work together better to look at projects which can deliver. I think one of my frustrations in my fairly long time within the UN has been that there's often initiatives, but they're too slow, they don't focus on impact, and they're not sustainable. So we have to look at those projects which have worked and stop the pilots and go big. And that's because the world, the environment, people's lives do not have the time or luxury to wait. We have to be much more. We have to treat the nature, the climate emergency as we've treated COVID. And I think COVID, if it's done anything, it's been able to demonstrate that the world can do something if they see it as an existential threat. The challenge with climate is it moves gradually, but we have to bang the drums, the pots and pans, and sort of like really hold people to account. Every tree that's been cut down, for what reason? Every water stream that's been polluted, for what reason? For every child that's not being educated in the need for a sustainable future, why not? So I think everyone that's on this call has a responsibility to make a difference.
Yeah, very rightfully said, and you have been contributing a lot towards this cause. Thank you very much, Andrew, for being with us. I know that you have to leave but good that you stayed back and you responded to very, very pertinent questions, which for which we are facing a lot of challenges in India, and your solutions, your suggestions will give good guidance for handling this problem of COVID-induced migration in the country. Thank you very much for being with us. I now move to Dr. V.V. Mathur, Chairman of National Biodiversity Authority. We know that India is one of the 17 mega diversity countries of the world. The conservation of biodiversity is crucial not only because it provides several goods and services necessary for human survival. Can you hear me, Dr. Mathur?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. I was just wanting to convey that we have certain importance for biodiversity in the country because it provides huge amount of goods and services for human survival, but it is also directly linked with providing livelihoods and improving socioeconomic conditions of millions of people in the country. Further, biodiversity conservation requires considerable financialization. Very, very major question, which we also addressed partially to Mr. Jha. My question to you, sir, is how can mainstreaming of biodiversity conservation be done with public finance?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Madhu, for asking this question. I would indeed begin by saying that it's a privilege for me to be part of this panel. And as we discuss how we can build back nature through nature-based solutions, definitely there has to be a trigger in mainstreaming. And we are also discussing how nature-based rebuilding and investing in natural capital can help us to reboot the sagging economy. Now, I would reiterate that there is an urgent need, although my fellow economists have said this, changing the entire paradigm of looking at economy from the material well-being perspective to that of a sustainable well-being of economy and nature. And definitely this cannot happen till we learn from our past activities and maybe some of the mistakes that we have made over there. Now, coming back to this question of how mainstreaming of biodiversity can happen, I have a few answers for that. And I must say that India very recently conducted what is called as a biodiversity expenditure review. And we have also prepared a biodiversity finance plan. And these were all being done as a part of the UNDP-led biodiversity finance initiative, or BioFin as we call it. Now, this exercise of biodiversity mainstreaming in the financial context has given us some very interesting results. We applied some very innovative and robust methodologies, and we have now come to a finding that there are as many as 116 public finance schemes of the 24 federal ministries, other than the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and 29 departments of the Government of India, which have been contributing to biodiversity conservation in a very substantial manner. And it should not be a surprise for our viewers to listen that the projected annual public finance expenditure is almost to the tune of $10 billion US. Now, as a part of this project, we also carried out what is called as a financial needs assessment, because we wanted to know that what is our requirement of funds as we plan to deliver our national biodiversity targets and indicators. Like many countries in the world who have prepared their national biodiversity strategy and action plan, we also have prepared our national biodiversity action plan. And when we did some cost calculations that what it will take to implement this biodiversity action plans and the 12 national biodiversity targets that we have set for ourselves, the figure is coming to a whopping $16.5 billion US annually. This is the kind of money that we need, whereas from all our sources that we have been able to work out is 10 billion US dollars. So there is obviously a funding gap, and not very small, a funding gap of 6.5 billion US dollars annually. And therefore the question before us is how this huge gap can be plugged. And to look at this issue more critically, we have also prepared a biodiversity finance plan. And we have looked at what kind of new solutions can we find. We started with about 12 solutions, 12 finance solutions as we call them, and we have prioritized 3 of them. And the one I'm going to talk to you now in response to your question is the finance solution, where we are talking of biodiversity mainstreaming of the public finance. Now, when we were looking at it, you will understand that the most standard way is to look at the Rio markers, which is the way in which we try to do monitoring and statistical reporting in the context of finance flows, and mainly in the response of 3 Rio conventions, the UNCBD, the UNCCD, and the UNFCCC. But we realized that these Rio markers are good, but they cannot help us to that level of precision as we would like to have in the context of India and in the context of biodiversity mainstream. So as we were working along, as I said, we looked at these 116 schemes of the federal government. We realized that 116 schemes are too big or too many. Can we zero down to a manageable number? And interestingly, we have come up with a new concept, an innovative tool, which we are calling as the Biodiversity Mainstreaming Index, or BMI. And this tool is allowing us to focus that which amongst these 116 schemes we need to focus. And I'm very pleased to say that there are 5 public schemes. And I'm sure speakers before me and Dr. Pushpam Kumar in particular mentioned about the Manrega. So these are the 5 big ticket scheme of the government of India, beginning with the Manrega of the Ministry of Rural Development. Then there is another scheme of National Rural Drinking Water Mission of the Ministry of Jal Shakti. Then we have the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, also of the Ministry of Jal Shakti. And then the Integrated Management Program of the Department of Land Reforms. And finally, it is the Atal Mission of Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, or AMRIT as we call them, of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So now what has happened? We have looked at these 5 schemes and we have tried to find out that what can we do to realign them? What can we do to tweak them? And some of the components of this scheme so that we can mobilize some additional resources. And interestingly, since we are talking about Manrega, which happens to be top of the line big ticket scheme, and this package which the government of India, the Ministry of Finance just released or informed and adopted, there is a substantial allocation to Manrega again. Already the allocation was to the tune of something like 40,000 crores, and now we have over 1 lakh crores given to Manrega. Now we have tried to look very precisely of how we can, or what we can do to mainstream Manrega. And when we looked at the scheme, there are actually 9 subcomponents, but 3 of them are very important. Components and expenditures related to soil and water conservation, the groundwater recharge, and the plantation. A huge amount of plantation work is planned. And that is where the role of the Ministry of Environment comes in, the Forest Department comes in, that if we can tweak this scheme, out of those 9 components, we are not saying that give more money or allocate more money, but within the component, within the allocation, if we can look at how we can do more afforestation, how we can do soil and water conservation, then certainly it will do wonders for biodiversity conservation. It will also lead to biodiversity related jobs. See, this is one of the major thrusts of the government and one of the major hassles with the Forest Department, that the activities should lead to job creation. So that is where we are now looking at that a further tweaking or a realignment of the components of Manrega and the other 4 schemes that I talked about can lead to a substantial amount of funding available for nature conservation. And these are all nature-based solutions. So it is our considered view that in the foreseeable future, public finance is going to be the mainstay for biodiversity finance in the country. But we will need to reconnect very strongly when we talk of poverty alleviation, when we talk of food security, human health, or sustainable livelihoods. These are the schemes which we look at and a very thorough application of biodiversity mainstreaming will help us to meet our desired objective. So I'll stop here, and perhaps you might have a second question as well.
Yeah, a short question rather. In fact, everybody is the user of biodiversity and its benefits. But
Madhu, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. I was just saying
Hello.
that, yeah, we can hear you, sir. We can hear you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was just saying in this particular context, you know, Jha Sahab
Yes, please.
mentioned.
Yeah, go ahead.
In this particular context,
No, that is what I was saying, that how mainstreaming can help.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, we heard you, sir. We heard you completely. I'm just wanting to add a small question to you for the discussion that Jha Sahab rightly mentioned that, you know, the corporate sector uses only 5 to 6% of their CSR funds towards environmental conservation, but they draw a lot from biodiversity because there's so much of dependence of corporate sector on nature. So what are the challenges? My question to you, sir, is what are the challenges of business biodiversity integration in India, and what role National Biodiversity Authority is playing in motivating investments on natural capital by companies? I just need answer in 2-3 minutes.
See, the challenge is huge. Getting to involve the corporates and the industry is a big challenge. Fortunately, we have the Corporate Social Responsibility Act, and we have done our own calculation. We feel that our corporates can provide us with a little effort, something to the tune of 170 million US dollars a year, or about 1,300 crores for projects relating to biodiversity conservation. But I want to flag an issue here. As of now, if you look at the CSR Act, it does not have the word biodiversity in it. So therefore, when we approach the corporates, they say that how can we fund you? How can we have our projects? There is no biodiversity mentioned in it. There is flora, there is fauna. And when we try to explain that what is all biodiversity about, but then this is the issue. So what we did in the last 2 months, we approached the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change and our secretary, Mr. C.K. Mishra, and we persuaded him to write a letter to the Secretary, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, saying very simple things that while it may be good to amend the act, but you know that amendments are not easy, can an advisory be issued to the corporates that funding and projects for biodiversity conservation can be done under corporate social responsibility. So I'm hopeful that once this advisory comes, it will be helpful, but we realize that we have to bring out our corporate leaders from their comfort zones. Right now, they've been funding education and health. We need to get them to biodiversity in order to allow them. And we are placing now and opening up a dialogue with the Institute for Corporate Affairs. And through that, we need to build capacity. So I'm hopeful that in coming years, although there will be a pressure to take funding for the COVID projects, we should be able to get some funding under this for biodiversity conservation.
Yeah, surely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Madhu, for giving us this information. And definitely everybody has to play an equally important role in conserving biodiversity because we draw a lot from nature. Thank you all speakers. We had a very, very invigorating discussion and we had so much knowledge to share. In fact, it has given us lots of pointers for further discussion and, you know, taking research also forward in many directions and on many important issues. We have little time because we've got lots of questions being received. I'll just put 1 or 2 questions bunched together for each of the speaker. I'll start with Zuha. A very interesting question come for you. It says that land and forest and water are 3 vital ecosystems and resources that are directly linked to life and livelihood of many populations. How these ecosystems can help tackling the pandemic situation? And what are the steps taken in this front? And what IUCN, in fact, has taken a lead in this particular area to provide, you talked a lot about nature-based solutions, how we can make use of these resource bases to provide nature-based solutions, and also at the same time, improve the livelihoods of the dependent populations. Over to you, Zuha.
Thank you, Madhu. Well, this is the key question. How do we manage and treat the ecosystems, agricultural landscapes, forests, wetlands, grasslands, as natural capital? And that's what nature-based solutions are all about. We need to think about them as forms of stocks of capital that we should manage in order to deliver those flows of benefits that we all get from them. And so that really is the key issue about nature-based solutions. There's been a discussion about nature-based solutions and whether they are available at scale. Are they so what we would call sometimes shovel-ready projects? That was a key question in the recovery from the 2008 crisis. And there are examples of where we have shovel-ready projects on nature-based solutions. They oftentimes may deal with climate, they may deal with water. We wish we would have had more, but I think there's evidence that they are there. They make economic sense from the societal perspective. They make sometimes economic sense even from the private sector perspective. There is some learning needed, but I'll just maybe refer to what I believe Andrew mentioned, is that we need to also go beyond pilot projects. And one of the key aspects of nature-based solutions is that they ought to function at scale. So IUCN is developing a nature-based solution standard, hopefully to be released over the summer. And this idea of being implementing projects at scale, implementing projects that are sustainable financially in the long term, is a key aspect of nature-based solutions. So some work there to be done. In some ways, it's a moonshot, but at the same time, it's not rocket science. This can be done if we put our mind to it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Zua, very much. My next question is directed to Helen. You talked a lot about climate change related, impacts, and also suggested a lot about nature-based solutions and how we have to proactively work towards conserving nature. The question is, while many heads of states have been undermining the value of natural resources and taken the path of reductionist economy to achieve developmental goals, there has been no consensus even on serious issues like climate change. In this context, how serious are the world leaders and policymakers in their commitment of nature and financing nature conservation in post-COVID era? You are doing a flagship report where you get a chance to meet so many heads of state and larger population, many countries. So I think you would have some idea about the trend currently about, and because we will divide this kind of a watershed year of post-COVID and pre-COVID kind of, situation. So history will be written for this particular purpose. What is the take of head of the states towards this particular situation?
Thank you, Madhu, and an excellent question. I do think we're at a tipping point now. We're seeing a real shift. Yesterday, I heard that if you look at the countries that have now, the governments that have now committed to net zero targets for their emissions, right? Setting targets, often many of them around 2050, which is what the science tells us we need to do to limit the worst effects of climate change. If you look at the countries that have done that and the companies, the CEOs that have stepped up to do so, we have over 50% of the global economy committed to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So that to me is a major shift from where we were last year, from 2 years ago, from 10 years ago, certainly. Sadly, it's late in coming. We should have made these shifts earlier, but it's much better to be late than not to happen at all. And not everyone is on board yet. So we still have work to do so. I do think that one of the things that has happened is over the last few years, we've seen an increasing incident of natural disasters. We've seen that around the world, droughts, floods, extreme wildfires. Sadly, these have come at great cost in terms of human lives, in terms of economies, in terms of communities, but that has actually helped to wake people up to the crisis that there is. So, we would hope that we could have that wake-up call without that kind of a crisis, but as one of the other colleagues said, I think COVID-19 now is another wake-up call. And I think that a number of heads of state, a number of CEOs are starting to wake up to that. The challenge now is being able to see the connections between the systems and the solutions which can actually resolve these issues together. So we have the economic crisis, the health crisis, the ecosystem crisis, the climate crisis. There are solutions that can actually resolve these various crises together, can help to do so, and we need to seize them. And one of the ones I mentioned before, I think that's very relevant to India. Well, two, I'd say that have come out of this discussion particularly. One is just investment using some of the funds that are going to be used for economic recovery. In many cases, there'll be a lot of investments in infrastructure. Look at green infrastructure, look at land restoration, planting trees, protecting waterways. Those are opportunities for developing infrastructure, to invest in infrastructure, and they tend to generate a lot of jobs and income in the rural economies which need them most, as well as protecting against future risks. So that's one. The other one I mentioned, of course, is on economic instruments. And India has had a fantastic record already of applying some economic instruments, reforming some of the fossil fuel subsidies in a way which really has helped to benefit low-income households and keep them protected. We've also seen in Gujarat some very good examples of reforming water subsidies and how that's actually benefited farmers and productivity, land productivity. So how do we spread that to other states in a scaled up way? But also, as I said, building on the example of the clean energy cess, are there potentially taxes that can be put in place now which can help to raise revenues to fund the government programs, but also shift away from the taxes that are hampering employment, for example? How do we shift away from taxing people, taxing jobs, to taxing pollution instead, and to valuing the benefits of nature to our economy? So I think there's some real potential there to bring that in. I do think that we're seeing a number of leaders are waking up to the crisis and the importance of moving forward, and actually the opportunities to do so, to deliver growth, poverty reduction, and jobs. So I hope that will also be the case in India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Couple of questions for Jha sir, aapke liye. I mean, many people have asked about, is there any criteria of looking at nature-based solution before permitting, allowing any fund from the Finance Commission? Does the intergovernmental resource allocation look at activities, projects which offer nature-based approach? Couple of people have asked this question to you. Jha sir. You have to unmute, yeah.
The straight answer is that no, we don't really look at nature-based solutions when we design intergovernmental transfers. In the sense that in terms of schemes and projects, etc., we are not really looking at that. In a broader sense, yes, we do look at it. And as I mentioned in my earlier comment, that 7.5% of the total divisible pool of taxes, which amounts to almost about 35 to 40 billion US dollars, or 250,000 crores, which goes to the states. 7.5%, oh sorry, more than that, 7.5% of the total devolved taxes were earmarked for forests, for the forest resources available to the states. The 15th Finance Commission has increased it to 10%. So in monetary terms, it's a huge increment which has gone to the states. So to that extent, we factor in nature and green concerns in our recommendations. This year, we have started an intervention for pollution control, particularly in the cities which are very badly affected. In fact, most of our metropolitan cities are suffering from pollution problems. And for air pollution management, we have provided grants. But as Mr. Mathur mentioned, through the central government schemes, which are transfers which are given by the central government from outside the Finance Commission award, those have a lot of components which address concerns of natural resource management, conservation, biodiversity, etc. So Mr. Mathur had mentioned almost 116 such interventions, but that's done by the central government. That does not really flow through a Finance Commission mechanism.
Thank you. So there are many questions because of constraint of time. We'll be sending these questions to you and maybe expecting a response from all the experts. I will quickly move to Pushpam and two very quick questions, and I need your answer in 2 minutes time. First question is, will it be possible to save environment when rebuilding starts? Because you talked a lot about bringing nature and biodiversity in the relief package. And second question is, most of the environment or saving nature conservation plans are framed and executed on macro level by government and NGOs. And you are also part of lots of assessment processes. But the person says that, but the people at large individual levels are not connected. They perceive these efforts to be concerned with departments. How can a single citizen be involved in these such assessment processes and then, of course, in the implementation process of such schemes? Over to you, Pushpam, in 2 minutes.
Thanks very much. See, the two things here, when we talk about, see, many of the discussion here, what we have done is very cryptic and talking like nature, or biodiversity. We have to go to very specific issues, a specific sector and the time, and then many of the questions can be answered. Take the example of land degradation, which you have also raised. In India, 42% land is degraded on, of course, various scale, severe to moderate. And our studies, UNEP studies done sometimes back, 2 years back, has shown that for 42 countries of Africa out of 54 and 46 countries in Asia, if you achieve land degradation neutrality world by 2030, that means lots of restoration activities, then you also halve poverty just by achieving land degradation neutral world, LDN. That is one of the SDG goals, Sustainable Development Goal 15.3. Similarly, there are lots of restoration activities, restoration of lakes, coastal areas, the forests. I mean, a lot of employment can be generated. Again, for clarity's sake, I want to say job cannot serve the purpose of this pandemic right now just by nature. But this pandemic has given us an opportunity to, as somebody said, reboot the economy, build back better. And we should have a long-term vision. And this is the opportunity where if nature is in the center, lot of problems can be solved. One more thing I want to add here. When we talk about measuring this progress and GDP, and please remember, this is also another message that in the post-pandemic world, the measures of progress and sustainability cannot be around GDP. If 1930s depression compelled Simon Kuznets to come forward with GDP, maybe we need now new indicator. Maybe we should think about wealth-centered economy where social capital is valued as much as produced capital, or similarly, natural capital has the same role. This reductionist GDP probably might not lead you, might not help you in keeping track of your progress. And finally, Manrega or other activities which other panelists have mentioned, of course, they came up with specific goals, but they do have highest employment elasticity of output, that is the employment generation ability. At the same time, they require lower amount of capital. So that also helps Government of India, especially the Rural Ministry, Rural Development Ministry, Mr. Tomar, because you don't need much of capital. If we have a long-term vision, build economy around the center, lot of problems can be solved in the post-pandemic.
Thank you very much, Pushpam. Thanks very much. Last question to Dr. Mathur. Lots of questions, definitely. I'll just pick up. I knew that I was quite expecting this question, and Jha Sahab rightly mentioned that in the relief package, almost 10% of the total Campa fund is being taken out for relief measure activities. So question pertains to that what is your response on the central government's decision about Campa fund to be included in the booster package of 20 lakh crores rupees? Do you not think that this fund needed to be spent basically on forest sector and has potential to tap homecoming migrant laborers?
If you look at, we are only talking of about 6,000 crores as opposed to the complete pot of money which the Campa has. And even these are meant for afforestation programs only. Here we are looking at afforestation of some targeted species. Perhaps there is a proposal being worked out with the Ministry of Jal Shakti that along the course of River Ganga, if we can have plantations, these plantations of medicinal plant species, it would be a win-win situation. So maybe the pot of funds come from CAMPA, but actually it is for afforestation, it is for biodiversity, it is for medicinal plant, and eventually leading to the livelihoods of people who are dependent upon. So I see no aberration over there. Rather, if we could have more of such funds dovetailed into afforestation of the right kind of species, then we will have a win-win situation in this case.
Definitely. Thank you very much. I wish we would have had more time for this discussion to continue, but we are very exceeded our allocated time of 1.5 hours. But I'm very happy that lots of interesting points came out and a lot of knowledge is being gained during the discussion. And because we had people at the helm of affairs sharing, their experience, their knowledge with us, and giving us kind of a guidance to, address this particular situation of COVID-19 and how nature can be at the center, and nature conservation, investment in nature, investing in nature, financing nature conservation can help us out, not just in meeting the immediate crisis, but also giving us long-term solutions. So I just take this moment of time to express my vote of thanks to all the panelists for taking out their very valuable time from their very busy schedule and joining us in this panel and sharing their thought-provoking, giving us thought-provoking, knowledge and address, and giving us a lot of information about actionable points, because we need to take this knowledge further and take it to the ground and make things happen using this knowledge base. So thank you very much, the panelists, Pushpam Kumar, Dr. Pushpam Kumar, Dr. Juha Sikamaki, Dr. Helen Mountford, Ajay Narayan Jha, Dr. Vinod Bihari Mathur, and Andrew Harper for joining us in this very invigorating, thought-provoking panel discussion. And I'm thankful to all the participants for joining us and staying us till late to continuously contributing for the discussion, throwing us questions. Of course, we could not handle all questions, but definitely we'll take into consideration and try to respond back with the help of all the panelists present in the discussion. I'm thankful to all the partner organizations, especially UNEP Nairobi and UNEP India office. And we have collaborated to do much larger work in future, many more such webinars. And thankful to National Biodiversity Authority, Dr. Mathur, for joining us in this webinar, joining us this particular webinar as one of the collaborating organization and helping us out in structuring the discussion. And definitely many partners like TEEP, which is a UNEP project, UNDP, WWF, Climate Policy Initiative will be joining us in future webinars. Thankful to especially Pushpam, Mr. Bagai, Divya, Simi, Dr. Mathur for helping us out in making this webinar happen. I'm greatly thankful to WRI team, a team from development, design, communication, economics center, and CEO's office. And of course, our CEO, Dr. Ropi Agrawal, for feeling very happy that we are launching this kind of webinar series and to build back better. We already have a couple of such webinars in WRI, but now we have joined hands with UNEP and we'll do lots of such webinars, keeping center definitely the nature in the center, and then trying to resolve various issues which are being put on us, which we are confronting on account of COVID-19. I'm thankful to the entire team, for the wholehearted support. Without them, this could not have been possible. Vyanda, especially Aman, Kavneet, Bodhi, Garima, Catherine, they have been my backbone. In fact, I've been, troubling them a lot, and we, in fact, worked till 2 o'clock in the night when we had time with all the team members to make this webinar happen. Thank you once again, all the participants, for very, very, active in participation, giving us lots of inputs and information, and making this webinar a great success. So we have a lot of food for future research, future action. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us in this webinar. And we look forward to joining you again with our webinar series on different other issues soon. I will communicate to you regarding that. Thanks very much. Have a good night and good day, Helen. Good day, Zuha, because you're
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us.